There is a moment that almost everyone who has ever done serious inner work can point to. Not a dramatic moment, not a moment that announced itself as significant, just a quiet, ordinary moment in the middle of an ordinary day when they stopped. They were in the middle of an explanation. They were in the process of justifying something about themselves to someone who had questioned it. They were doing the thing they had done 1,000 times before, assembling the case for themselves, constructing the argument that they were reasonable, that their choice was valid, that their feeling was understandable, that who they were was acceptable, and then they stopped. Not because they had run out of words, because something inside them, quietly and without drama, simply refused to continue. And the refusal was not angry. It was not defiant. It was more like the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you had been carrying for so long you had forgotten it was heavy. That moment is the subject of this video. Not the dramatic transformation, not the loud breaking point, not the confrontation that everyone sees coming. The quiet moment when the explaining stops. Because what happens after that moment, in the relationship, in the room, in the person who stopped explaining, is one of the most consequential and least understood shifts in human psychology. The people who have been through it know it. The people who have not been through it cannot quite imagine it. And the people who most need to hear about it are the ones who are still in the middle of an explanation right now, still constructing the case for themselves to someone who was never going to accept the verdict no matter how airtight the argument, still spending the energy they need for their own life on the task of managing other people's opinions of it. Let's begin with the question almost no one asks, because the compulsion to explain is so universal that it has never occurred to most people to interrogate it. Why do you explain yourself at all? Not in the practical sense, not the explanation that is genuinely useful, that transfers necessary information, that clarifies a misunderstanding that matters. Those explanations have a function and a place. I am talking about the other kind, the kind that happens after the useful information has already been transferred, the kind that continues after the point of clarity has already been reached, the kind that is still running long after the other person has already formed their opinion and is no longer really listening, the kind that you find yourself doing, if you look honestly, not to inform the other person but to manage what they think of you. Why does that happen? What is the actual mechanism driving it? The mechanism is old and it is not yours alone. It is a mechanism installed in almost every human being who grew up in an environment where love and acceptance were, even slightly, conditional, where the warmth of the people around you was not constant and unconditional but responsive to your behavior, to your performance, to whether you were producing the kind of self that the environment found acceptable. In those conditions, and this covers the vast majority of human childhoods to one degree or another, the small person you were learned something essential for survival. They learned that the difference between being accepted and being rejected often came down to the quality of the explanation, to how well you could account for yourself, to how convincingly you could make the case that what you did, felt, wanted, or were was reasonable and understandable and within the range of what would be tolerated. The explaining worked. That is why it continued. Not always and not perfectly, but often enough that the nervous system filed it as a viable survival strategy. Explain yourself clearly enough, completely enough, convincingly enough, and the warmth returns. The danger passes. The connection is maintained. And decades later, in adult relationships that bear no structural resemblance to the original environment, in conversations with people who have no actual power over your survival, in situations where the stakes of the other person's disapproval are essentially zero, the strategy is still running. Because the nervous system does not automatically update its survival strategies based on the change of circumstances. It keeps running what worked long past the conditions that made it work, into a context where the same behavior now costs far more than it earns. What does it cost? This is the part that is almost never tallied, because the explaining happens in such small units, each one so apparently justified, that the cumulative cost is invisible until it is enormous. Each explanation costs energy, the specific, finite, irreplaceable psychic energy that you have available in any given day. Each explanation costs time, the time spent constructing the case, rehearsing it, delivering it, monitoring the other person's response, adjusting for their pushback, and then replaying the whole thing afterward to assess what went wrong when it did not land the way you intended. Each explanation costs, more subtly but more significantly, a piece of your relationship with your own authority over your own life. Because every time you explain yourself to someone who did not require the explanation for any legitimate purpose, you are accepting implicitly their jurisdiction over the thing you are explaining. You are treating their opinion of your choice as something that matters enough to require a defense. You are, in the architecture of the interaction, positioning yourself as the defendant and them as the judge. And you are doing this not because they have any actual jurisdiction, they do not, but because the old mechanism running automatically has generated the explanation before you consciously decided whether to give it. There is a concept from the depth tradition that is essential here, and it is the concept of the persona. The persona is the mask, not in the pejorative sense of a false or dishonest mask, but in the more neutral, structural sense of the face that is assembled for social presentation. Every person has one. Every person needs one. The persona is the self you show the world, the edited, curated, contextually appropriate version of yourself that allows social life to function. And the persona is, in part, maintained through explanation, through the continuous project of making your inner self legible and acceptable to the outer world, through the constant calibration of how you are being perceived and the adjustments you make to bring the perception closer to the version of yourself you want to be seen as. The problem is not the persona. The problem is when the persona becomes more real to you than the self underneath it. When the maintenance of the persona, the explaining, the justifying, the managing of perceptions becomes the primary occupation of your inner life at the expense of the actual life happening beneath the persona. And most people, if they are honest, spend the majority of their psychic energy on persona maintenance, not on building, creating, feeling, experiencing, becoming, on managing how they are seen, on explaining the self to people who were not asking about the self or who were asking, but for purposes that had nothing to do with genuine understanding. If something in this is starting to press on something uncomfortable, take 1 second now and subscribe. The work we do here is the interior work, the layer beneath the persona, the place where the explaining is keeping you from hearing your own voice. Hit the bell while you are there. Let's keep going, because what comes next is the specific and practical shape of what changes when you stop. There are 3 things that immediately begin to shift the moment you stop explaining yourself, and they are worth naming specifically because the shift in each one is so different from what the explaining mind expects that most people are surprised by it. The first shift is in how other people respond to you. This is counterintuitive, and it is the thing that the explaining mind most resists believing, because the logic of the explaining mind says that if you explain yourself clearly enough, people will understand you and treat you accordingly. And the corollary of that logic is that if you stop explaining, they will misunderstand you and treat you worse. The opposite is almost universally what happens. When you stop explaining, you stop providing the material from which the other person's narrative about you is constructed. You stop giving them the arguments they have been using to counter your arguments. You stop positioning yourself as the defendant in a trial that, as long as you keep showing up for it, you are implicitly accepting as legitimate. And in the absence of your explanation, the dynamic changes. They are left with their position and no material to push against. This is not comfortable for them. The human mind is built around feedback loops, and a position without pushback is a strange and disorienting condition. Some people, encountering your silence where your explanation used to be, will escalate. This escalation looks like a problem. It is not. It is the dynamic collapsing, which always looks messy before it looks resolved. Some people will quietly revise their position because the position was always more about extracting the reaction than about the content of the argument. And some, the ones who were engaging in genuine good faith from the beginning, will ask a real question because the space that the explanation was filling has now opened into something that makes room for actual dialogue. The second shift is in your relationship with your own choices. This one is deeper and more durable. When you stop explaining your choices to other people, something changes in how you experience making choices. The explaining was, all along, an act of seeking external ratification for decisions that should have been internal. And the explaining was producing, as a side effect, a specific kind of chronic uncertainty, because decisions that require external ratification can never feel settled. There is always one more person to convince. There is always one more argument that might land differently. There is always the possibility that the next conversation will produce the definitive acceptance that would finally make the choice feel okay. This is not a flaw in your reasoning. It is a structural consequence of outsourcing the authority for your own life to external opinion. The choice cannot feel settled because it has not been settled internally. It has been handed to the court of other people's approval, and courts never close their cases. When you stop explaining, you are forced, sometimes uncomfortably, always ultimately productively, to settle the choice internally, to become the authority for your own decisions, to ask not what can I say that will make them accept this, but what do I actually believe about this for my own reasons, and am I willing to stand in it without their endorsement? This is one of the most significant developmental moves a human being can make. And it cannot be made while the explaining is still running, because the explaining is the outsourcing, and as long as you are outsourcing, you are not yet being the authority. The third shift is the one that takes longest to arrive and has the most lasting effects. It is the shift in what you attract, not in the mystical or vague sense that is sometimes used for this word. In the specific, mechanical sense. The people who were drawn to your explaining were drawn, in many cases, to something specific about the explaining, to the access it gave them, to the influence it implied, to the window into your interior that it opened, to the mechanism it provided for extracting your attention and energy. People who criticize and wait for the explanation are not primarily interested in the explanation. They are interested in what the explanation reveals, in the soft place it exposes, in the map it provides of where you can be reached. When the explanation stops, these people lose their primary interface with you. They lose the lever. And in many cases, they leave not dramatically, but simply because the dynamic that was sustaining their interest in you no longer exists. The people who remain after the explaining stops, and the new people who come in after the explaining stops, have been filtered. They are the ones who can relate to you without the lever, who find you interesting without needing access to your vulnerabilities, who engage with what you actually are rather than with the explanation of what you are. The quality of the relationships that form in the silence after the explaining stops is consistently, across every person who has made this shift, higher than the quality of the relationships that formed while the explaining was still running. Because explanation, whatever else it does, also functions as an attractant for people who profit from your uncertainty. And when the uncertainty goes underground, when you stop performing it through explanation, the attractant turns off. Now let's address the thing that makes the shift so hard, because we have described the benefits and they are real, but if the benefits were sufficient to overcome the resistance, everyone who understood them would have already stopped explaining, and the rooms of the world would be considerably quieter than they are. The thing that makes it hard is not ignorance of the benefits. The thing that makes it hard is that the explaining is not just a behavior. It is a need. And needs do not respond to the intellectual understanding that meeting them is counterproductive. Needs respond to the meeting of the underlying want that the need was constructed to address. What is the underlying want? At the deepest layer, beneath the explaining, beneath the need for the other person's understanding, beneath the need for their acceptance, beneath the need for their warmth, the underlying want is the want to be known. Not approved of, known. To have someone see accurately who you actually are, without the mediating layer of misunderstanding, projection, or judgment. The explaining is, at its root, an attempt to be known. An attempt to bridge the gap between the self that exists inside and the version of that self that is accessible to others. And the tragedy, the thing that makes the explaining not just ineffective but actively counterproductive, is that it cannot accomplish what it is attempting. Not because the words are wrong, because being known is not a result of being correctly explained. Being known is a result of being actually seen by someone who is actually looking in a context of actual mutual openness. And correct explanation, delivered to someone who is not looking in a context of one-sided exposure, produces not being known but being mapped. Your explanation gives them a map. The map is used to navigate you, not to know you. And the better the explanation, the more accurate the map, and the more efficiently they can navigate you toward the outcomes that serve them. The want to be known is real, and it is legitimate, and it is not going away. What has to change is not the want, but the strategy being used to address it. The explaining is the wrong strategy. Not because explanation is bad, explanation has its place and its function and its genuine uses. But because the explaining you have been doing, the defensive kind, the justificatory kind, the kind aimed at managing perceptions and earning approval, was never going to produce being known. It was always going to produce, at best, being tolerated, at worst, being mapped. The strategy that actually produces being known is different. It involves stillness rather than speech. It involves the willingness to let someone see you without management rather than presenting the managed version. It involves choosing deliberately and carefully the people in front of whom you allow that kind of exposure, and not allowing it in front of the people who have demonstrated that they will use the exposure to map and navigate rather than to know. This is one of the most important distinctions in all of human relationship, and it is one that the explaining mind cannot make while it is still explaining. Because the explaining mind is operating from scarcity, from the assumption that if this person does not understand, no one will, and that any understanding is better than none. So it explains to everyone. It makes its case to people who are not capable of receiving it, not interested in receiving it, or actively opposed to receiving it. It throws the precious and limited material of its inner life at audiences that return almost nothing for it. And what the inner life is doing the whole time is being spent, being depleted, being handed out in small and large portions to people who will never give it the only thing it was actually looking for. When the explaining stops, the energy that was going into it becomes available. This is one of the first things the people who have made this shift consistently report. A strange, slightly disorienting increase in available energy. Not because they are doing less work, because they are doing the right work. Because the energy that was going into the construction of cases for themselves is now staying inside, available for the construction of the actual life, for the creating, for the building, for the becoming, For the relationships, much fewer in number but incomparably richer in quality, in which they are not explaining themselves but simply being themselves, and finding, to their repeated surprise, that this version of themselves, the unexplained one, is received more warmly and known more accurately by the rare people who are capable of it than the explained version ever was by the many people who were given the explanation. There is a line that has been passed through the contemplative traditions in various forms for centuries, and it captures the thing we have been circling. What you are speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. The explaining is the saying. What you are is the being. And the being, when it is allowed to show without the saying covering it, communicates with a directness and a completeness that no explanation can replicate. The person who has stopped explaining does not become more mysterious or more withholding or more difficult to know. They become, paradoxically, more knowable because the thing between them and the world is no longer the managed, curated, explained version of themselves, but the actual thing. The living self, present and undefended, available to whoever can meet it where it is. The practical question, then, is not whether to stop explaining. The practical question is how, because the mechanism runs automatically, and the wanting underneath it is real, and the social pressure to keep explaining is constant and in many contexts extremely powerful. The shift does not happen in one decision. It happens in 1,000 small decisions made repeatedly in moments where the automatic explaining wants to begin and something in you, the part that is slowly learning to be the authority, chooses not to. The practice looks like this. The next time you feel the explaining begin, the next time someone questions a choice you have made, or implies a criticism, or asks the kind of question that has a real agenda behind it, pause. Not to compose a better explanation, to notice the impulse, to feel it fully, to acknowledge that it is there, that it is old, that it is doing what it has always done. And then to ask, specifically and practically, one question before proceeding. Is this explanation for them or for me? If it is genuinely for them, if it transfers information they actually need, clarifies something that genuinely matters, serves the relationship in a concrete and mutual way, then give it. Explanation has its legitimate place and you will still use it. But if the honest answer to the question is that the explanation is for you, that it is aimed at managing their perception of you, earning their approval, defending yourself against a judgment that you have already implicitly accepted by taking it seriously enough to defend against, then withhold it. Not forever, not as a punishment, just right now. Let the space stand. Let the question hang. Let the judgment, if that is what it is, exist without your acknowledgement that it required an answer. This will feel wrong in the beginning. It will feel like rudeness, like coldness, like you are failing a social obligation that you are supposed to meet. This feeling is the old mechanism correctly identifying that you are not feeding it and generating the discomfort that has always before caused you to relent and feed it. The discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are doing something unfamiliar. And the unfamiliar in the territory of inner work is almost always the direction of growth. Over time, if you hold the practice, the discomfort softens. The silence becomes less charged. The space where the explanation used to live becomes gradually something else. Something that feels, from the inside, surprisingly close to dignity. Not the performed dignity of someone who has decided to seem above the fray. The actual dignity of someone who has stopped accepting the premise that other people's uninvited opinions of their life require a response. The dignity of someone who has, quietly and without announcement, retrieved the authority for their own existence from the court of public opinion and returned it to the only place it was ever supposed to live, inside. And that retrieval, that quiet, undramatic, repeated act of reclaiming your own authority by refusing to defend it, is the shift. It is not a moment. It is a direction. You will not wake up one morning having fully arrived. But you will, if you stay in the practice, begin to notice that the explaining is less automatic. That the impulse arrives and you feel it arriving and you have a moment of choice that you did not used to have. That the moment of choice, exercised repeatedly, is building something. Something quiet, something solid, something that does not need to be explained to be real. If this reached the place that the noise usually drowns out, do something for me now. Write in the comments these 3 words. I stop explaining. Just that. Because writing it is the first act of choosing it, and choosing it even once is the beginning of the direction. And give this video a like if it moved something, not for me, but as a small signal to yourself that you heard what was being said. The next video continues into the deeper territory that opens up after the explaining stops, what you find in the silence that the explaining was filling, and what to do with what you find there. It is more important than this one. I will see you there.